James Farr here, live from Pasadena Media Studios. Get ready for more piercing and provocative Conversation Live. Starts now. And welcome to another episode of the Conversation Live. The Conversation Live focuses on social justice, restorative justice, inclusion, and equality. Today, joining me is Alex Keledjian, who is the secretary of the Super PAC here in Pasadena, which is Business Leaders for Better Government, and it's Super PAC. I want to unpack with Alex and get to understand a little bit more from a local standpoint. Usually when we hear about Super PACs, we think about things in Washington, D.C., maybe at the state level, but there's actually one here in Pasadena, and I want to find out, are they the boogeymen like some have said? I also want to talk with Alex a little bit about how the recent acceleration to minimum wage, $15, has impacted the business community as well as affordable housing. Alex, thanks so much for joining me today. I appreciate it, man.
Pleasure to be here. I'm excited.
Absolutely. Young guy, dapper guy, very smart. I hear people speak very highly of you. Republican. You spent some time working in the Republican Party. You're listed as a Republican official. But this Super PAC that you're a part of, I understand it's a nonpartisan group. What exactly is a Super PAC?
Well, in this case, a Super PAC is one that is following federal guidelines. So we are under the auspices of the FEC. And we are trying to target federal issues that we believe have an impact in our local community or local issues that will have an impact on a federal level. So for example, you have a lot of cities that are watching Pasadena, an example they were setting with this minimum wage. So we wanted to try and bring an organization that brought about a voice and strength for small business owners. For some time it seemed like there was not a voice for small business owners in the community, so this was our plan to try and bring together an organization, bipartisan. We don't support any party or anything like that. We are just trying to tackle local issues that we believe need to have a strong discussion on both sides.
Now, that boogeyman comment, you know, because when you hear PAC, you hear about hard money, you hear about soft money. You know, we hear typically that they tend to influence things. So why is that not true about your organization, your PAC?
Well, this is not, like most PACs, the PACs that you're talking about that have that negative image, it's usually some sort of a cell that's put together by federal politicians in support of their campaign. For example, I remember reading about a PAC, a federal Super PAC, that was created for Ted Cruz just within a couple of days of the election and then closed the moment the election ended. That's not our purpose here. Our purpose here is to advocate, our purpose here is to educate, our purpose here is to be a fair, nonpartisan counterpoint to the issues that are affecting our local community. And this is something not just for the Pasadena area, this is something we want to take to other cities and try and bring a strong voice there, whether it be Glendale, Burbank, cities in Orange County or up north.
And so your funding, how are you raising money and how are you deciding what causes or initiatives or even candidates to get behind?
Well, we're meeting with local business owners, we're meeting with local constituents that have a stake in the issues that we are interested in. We're just educating people about this is how we will be staking positions, more or less, do you support where we stand, and this is how we can help. So for example, with the minimum wage, we were supportive of minimum wage hike, but our discussion point was, do we follow the state guidelines or do we follow the fast track deadline that was put by the city?
Well, we'll definitely want to get to that a little bit later. You know, I want to talk a little bit more. I mean, Cheryl Turner's a co-founder with you, as well as Bishop Christopher Milton. And why the three of you? I mean, what was the intersection that brought the three of you together to decide that this is how we're going to organize and then activate?
One phone call from Cheryl. This was an idea thought of by Cheryl to try and advocate for small businesses. And I kid you not, I just got a phone call from her saying, what do you think about putting together an organization that advocates for small business? And I told her she's preaching to the choir. So she and I met. We met up with Bishop Milton, and we decided to put this PAC together, put a plan together, and move forward. Just total grassroots effort.
According to, I believe it's your social media, there was a commenter, Jason, who made some inference that, this was a rich, well-funded organization or person, in terms of you guys' advocacy. I mean, is that the case? Is that not the case? I know Cheryl's not here to speak for herself, but just trying to understand a little bit more about the background.
Yeah. If he's insinuating that I'm rich or Cheryl and the bishop is rich, I would like to know where those riches are. This is not some sort of a multi-million-dollar initiative meant to destroy lives or careers or destroy campaigns or anything like that. This is simply a local grassroots effort to educate constituents. There is always another side to the coin, and that's exactly our purpose, just to educate.
So I want to know what prepares you now. I mean, you worked with, you worked with former Supervisor Michael Antonovich. You've also worked in the Los Angeles City District Attorney's Office for the City of Los Angeles and even for Congressman in Washington. What has prepared you for this moment?
Well, what has prepared me is something that's prepared everybody. I mean, this is not just something that I can do, this is something that everybody can do, because in this sense, I am feeling the impact that these local decisions make. I am looking for affordable housing to move into. I feel the pinch when I go to a local business, when I purchase an item. I mean, this is something that I feel from myself, and I felt that with the experiences that I've had in the political realm, I thought it's something I can contribute. And that was one of the reasons why Cheryl called me.
What was it like working for Supervisor Antonovich?
Supervisor Antonovich was probably the greatest man I've ever worked for. With hands down, the
so?
greatest man I've ever worked for. His intentions were pure. Everything was about the community. I mean, he was everywhere. Everybody knew him. I mean, it was just, I've never worked for a man like that who was just so, I mean, really, for the lack of a better way to put it, loved by the community. I mean, he knew everything about everybody. You threw a name, he knew the person, he knew the family, he knew the parents, and he said, okay, so what's the issue? How can we help? I mean, he was very, very hands-on.
And how did that translate to you and how you're activating in the community now and in your work? Because you're on the board of directors of the Los Angeles County Republican Party, right?
Yeah.
So relatively young guy. I mean, a rising star. How what you learned from the supervisor, how is that translated for you?
All politics is local. Everything is very local based. I mean, you look at the board of supervisors right now. You have one supervisor who's a former member of Congress. You have one supervisor who is a former member of President Obama's administration. I mean, they held two very, very powerful positions, and both of them walked away from it just to run and serve on the board of supervisors. So working for Supervisor Antonovich made me realize all politics is local, and the true effect that you have on people is at the local stage. They left federal offices to run for a local office. He had more impact on any community than any state assembly member or state senator could ever have, including a member of Congress. I mean, just the power and influence that he had and the changes he was able to bring to this community was massive. Putting a courthouse in Antelope Valley, the refurbishment of Olive View Hospital up in Sunland, Tahunga, freeway construction, the railroad line, the gold line, that would not have been there if it wasn't for Mike Antonovich. I mean, just the level of impact you can have is massive.
Okay, let me check in. You're watching The Conversation Live. The Conversation Live focuses on social justice, restorative justice, inclusion, and equality. Joining me today is Alex Keledjian, and I'm going to get that right before we get out of here. And we're talking about the Super PAC and really understanding what its role is here in Pasadena. And that PAC is Business Leaders for Better Government, and it was formed by a group of concerned citizens. And they wanted to advocate for different issues. They're a nonpartisan group. Alex, I wanted to talk to you. We touched on it a little bit earlier, the minimum wage.
Yeah.
And there was much discussion about the acceleration to the minimum wage as opposed to waiting to follow the state guidelines. And you know, typically when we hear about, you know, business owners, we tend to think of them as Republicans. How has that been an impact on them from the people owners that you've talked to? How have their businesses been impacted?
So for example, one business owner that I spoke with, this minimum wage would cost the business $40,000. And that $40,000, he now has to take a look at and figure out exactly how is this going to be essentially handled? How am I going to mitigate my business plan to compensate for the $40,000 Now, new costs. Is that a cost that I will be eating up as the business owner? Is this a cost that I will push on to the prices of our foods? What will be the consequences for this decision? Now, remember a line he said, there's only so much I can charge for a hamburger. And so now you've got businesses that are trying to quickly put together a business plan to essentially answer for this relatively immediate minimum wage increase.
I mean, but shouldn't the businesses have to adjust? I mean, that's
there's no
cost of goods go up,
Yeah.
things go up,
Yes.
things fluctuate, inflation,
Of
everything happen. These are market determinants. They have to adjust. I just read an article, one of the co-owners of Doghouse, a Pasadena-based chain restaurant. You know, they're making the adjustments. They see this coming. It may be shifts in how they provide services, fewer staff. I've also heard that, and this speaks to, you know, what the Doghouse is doing, is they're looking at people with higher skill sets to come in at the entry level. So do you think that this increase and this acceleration, who's going to be impacted the most? Is it going to be the employees, or is it going to be the business owners, or will it be us, the consumers?
Well, here's the way that I look at it. There is no doubt that the businesses have to conform. Minimum wage is coming whether you like it or not, to quote Gavin Newsom. And we weren't fighting minimum wage. We were supportive of minimum wage. What we merely wanted was for the city to follow the state guidelines that the state passed, i.e. waiting one more year to allow these businesses to breathe and bring together a plan. Now, the differences with the restaurant industry is that 80% of restaurants within the first 3 years fail. I mean, that's just the fact of the matter. The restaurant business is just
It's a competitive business.
It's a very difficult business.
I mean, but we have 600 restaurants here in Pasadena.
Yes.
So they're thriving.
Yeah.
Some of them better than others.
Yeah. But places like Doghouse, which is thriving, growing in the amount of shops that they have, almost, if I'm not mistaken, it's become a franchise.
Yes.
It is a growing business. But they're only 20% of the pie. The 80% of the pie are those struggling restaurant, like the restaurant owner that I'm referring to, who's trying to figure out where exactly am I going to be pushing this cost or not. Allowing that 2 to 3 years of extended time would allow that slow, gradual increase of whether it be food prices or shifting around employment hours, whatever it may be. But as long as those employees are not losing their jobs, then it's a successful transition. Now you have this forces where he's trying to figure out in a quick manner exactly how am I going to be responding to this action. So I do think that there could have been a right way. I do think there could have been a stronger way for the businesses, and I do think the way the city did it was the incorrect way. And I understand what, I mean, the problem with politics nowadays is people are so emotionally charged about the differences in issues, but they're failing to see that at the end of the day we all have the same mission. Of course we want businesses to succeed, and of course we want workers to make more money. There's no doubt about that, and that is all what we want. It's just how do we get there the right way without hurting anybody?
I mean, but with the voters signaling yes that they want this increase, with the advocacy that went behind accelerating it ahead of the state, I mean, aren't the people clearly saying that, you know, business, figure it out, you know, we'll pay more, but, you know, this livable wage, isn't that something that you all should be willing to do? You know, and you would hear pushback from some of the owners that it's gonna hurt, it's gonna hurt. But is it the government's job to kind of make it easier for them to exist, or is the fair wage a more humanistic approach to looking at the situation?
I think government should make it fair. I think that's the purpose of government. Government should be.
I mean, but how is the government not making it fair in the instance of Pasadena, where the council decided to accelerate, built in a pause so they could reevaluate, but overwhelmingly hundreds of people showed up week in and week out in city council meetings. So why shouldn't, you know, the businesses just acquiesce and just eat it, I mean, so to speak?
Because at the end of the day, that it would be not a feasible business plan for some of these businesses. Most small businesses are barely thriving, are barely making ends meet. And to put that immediate pressure on small businesses would be an unwise decision on the part of our local government. small businesses, small restaurants recognize that there needs to be a change in this, and there will be a change. But when you allow them to breathe, when you allow them to formulate a plan, it will be a stronger reaction to these changes, and it will allow them for them to keep their employees or change the times of their employees or whatever it may be, so those employees acquire the benefits of the $50 minimum wage and at the same time do not lose their jobs.
Okay, let me check in. You're watching The Conversation Live. The Conversation Live focuses on social justice, restorative justice, inclusion, and equality. And we're just learning a little bit more about what a PAC is, a super PAC, and how they play a role in this local footprint. Alex, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about as well is this affordable housing issue, which, some would argue that the market should determine the rent. Others are advocating for rent control and just rent cause. Where do you land on this? What's the PAC's position?
Well, the PAC really hasn't delved into rent control yet. Rent control, obviously, very, very thick topic, which would require all of us to do extensive research to see what would be best for the community. So as of right now, the PAC has not taken an official position on what we want to do with rent control.
Okay, because I know at least 56% of the residents here in Pasadena are renters.
Yeah.
And, I am hearing stories of people's rent being increased $250 to $600 in 1 month.
Yeah.
Then if we, obviously you tie that back to the minimum wage, or what is a livable wage in LA County, about $27, people are still not going to be able to afford.
Minimum wage and the issue, I'm so sorry, with the rent control, is you have a housing crisis in California, specifically
Shortage.
Los Angeles, which heavily impacts this the issue of rent control. And there's been no shift in government plan of exactly how we're going to be increasing government and more houses being built. So it's a much broader issue, in my opinion, than just the issue of rent control.
How do we solve the affordable housing issue?
Well, right now you have, on a personal opinion, right now you have an issue where there's been no proper government action on behalf of the needs of the local communities. You have this one-size-fits-all model that the state has been trying to implement, but that has not been the right solution for it. The needs of the Central Valley are not the needs of the metropolitan areas of Los Angeles or San Francisco. I mean, let's just look at the Southland area, for example, the areas that touches Los Angeles County. Los Angeles County, by and large, is a massive urban area. Orange County is suburban. Ventura and Kern County and San Bernardino are more or less farms and suburbs. The largest cities in those areas are, around 200 to 300,000. Those are just large suburban cities. So the needs of those areas are vastly different than the needs of the urban area. And the Massachusetts governor, Charlie Baker, did a great piece with this issue, where the eastern portion of Massachusetts is urban and the western is more suburb rural. So his implementation to deal with this housing crisis is proposing legislation that is very narrow and very tailored to the specific area that it is in question. So some language may say housing only in the certain portions of Los Angeles may allow X, Y, and Z to be built. That would allow the local communities to be in charge of what it is they want to do. You cannot put a 50-story building in Pasadena. It would destroy the natural hub of Pasadena.
Sure.
Whereas if you put that in downtown, that's a different story. So it's state working in conjunction with local entities, seeing what is right for the local entities, and at the same time removing the shackles to allow developers and businesses to invest and grow.
Should there be any incentive for developers to build affordable housing? I'm not talking about low income, but affordable housing.
Yeah.
And then where would we find within our city, like real estate is the issue, land use, available land is an issue.
Yeah.
But back to that, should there be an incentive for developers to do the affordable housing?
Yeah, of course. I mean, there should be incentive for developers to develop any type of thing that would be beneficial to the community. One issue I remember reading was a fight, and this was actually more or less a bipartisan issue that I noticed. You had Governor Jerry Brown trying to loosen the requirements for the CEQA law, which is the, if I'm not mistaken, it is the, oh Lord, I can't even remember the exact name, but it is the regulations for the environmental impact of a new structure that's being built. And his whole purpose is how do we try and loosen this act, which has good intentions, i.e. developers seeing what the environmental impact is, and at the same time loosening it so that way developers can quickly build a project and not spend years and years in litigation fighting it.
Okay. 2020 election is coming up.
Yeah.
And it'll be here before you know it. We're roughly now 1 year out from primaries at federal, state, county, local, just across the board. What do you predict next year in terms of, will people be more engaged now that we've kind of aligned the elections up to fall all on the federal?
If I was a betting man, I would be on the streets if I bet in the 2016 elections. So I cannot bet on what I think will happen in 2020 elections. The one thing I do think will be certain, a lot of people will be involved, a lot of people will be voting. I mean, the election in 2018, I could not believe the amount of people that were voting. I mean, my home, for example, almost every day there was a volunteer knocking for some sort of a campaign. So I do think 2020 will be an electrifying year. I do think there will be, I think it will be earth-shattering numbers in the amount of people that go vote. As for who will win, who knows?
Too early to call who will get the Democratic Party nomination?
No, I think it'll be a very fascinating election season. You have politicians from such a broad spectrum who essentially will be fighting for the nomination. And this was more or less the same issue with the Republicans in 2016. So I'll be very curious to see who the nominee is and then seeing what the issues are once that nominee is chosen. So for example, right, when Trump was nominated, immigration was a major issue. For the Democrats, if let's say Elizabeth Warren is the nominee, maybe banking and the Green New Deal will be an issue. Whereas if it's Joe Biden, it may be businesses and jobs in local small communities. So I think it'll depend who the nominee is, and then depending on that issue, how weak or strong the president is, will depend on if he wins or not.
Locally, one person has entered the race, or at least announced that they're going to be running, Major Williams, a young African-American Republican.
Yeah.
Even though the race is, the election is a, nonpartisan.
Yeah.
You think Major has a chance? What do you think of Major?
I do think Major has a chance. I do think it will be a very interesting and exciting mayoral campaign. I do think there are a lot of issues that need to be discussed and brought forward, and I think Major has done a very good job of just being out there, talking to constituents, reaching out to constituents. I mean, he's everywhere. So I think he's done a very good job of trying to feel the heartbeat of the community. So it'll be an interesting race. Looking forward to watching that race for sure.
It should be pretty exciting, to say the least. And we have others that are starting to come into play. Before we get ready to get out of here, I know last thing I definitely want to touch on was you guys weren't in favor of the sales tax. Why? I mean, it was to benefit the schools,
Yes.
But what was your issue with the increase of Measure I and J?
It's regressive.
How so?
Sales taxes are the most regressive tax in the history of taxation. When you are of a lower income stature, more portion of your income is going to sales than will be if someone of a larger portion. A sales tax is the most regressive tax. A better tax, like property tax, for example, would not be regressive. It's proportionate to the individual and how much the individual makes, or the income tax, for example. But here you have low-income families who could barely make ends meet, i.e. with them wanting more, with rent control coming in, and now at the same time they're spending more at the markets. So I think the sales tax was regressive. I think that there could have been a better solution to it. I do think that PUSD is in need of financial assistance. You have an entire collapse of the student population year in and year out, but more, there's still a stabilization of the amount of employees that are there, the school sites. I do think there's a major need of change. I give my prayers to those 7 to try and figure out what the best solution is, but I do not think that a sales tax is the right way.
You would have been more in favor of a property tax as opposed to a sales tax.
I'm not a fan of any taxes, but I do think that there could have been a smarter solution than a sales tax, which will impact lower income individuals more, statistically speaking.
I mean, but when you look at the actual percentage, I mean, it's like 75 cents on $100, right? I mean, we're not talking about, a big impact at the register, although quantifiably it will add up. I get that. But, the school district is impacted because that you could attribute that back to affordable housing. Families leaving, and by the hundreds because of the cost of living here. So if it was one way to raise funds, an additional, I believe, $7 million, why isn't that a good idea? Other than the fact you just don't agree with it being the most progressive way, you think it's regressive?
Yes. If if the amount of money that's coming in is the reason for it to say that, you know what, we know that this is good, it's okay, we should put this tax, might as well get rid of all those those limits on taxes and increase everyone's taxes. Then you'd have more money coming in. At the end of the day, irrespective of how that small amount was, 75 cents or whatever it may be, in the long run, it will cost money. I mean, look at, for example, minimum wage, right? People are saying, oh, it's only $1 increase, 50-cent increase, depending on what your business plan is. But you look at that in the long run, that is a lot of money for a business. $200, an extra dollar that's spent for a low-income individual, that is a lot of money. So when you add that up throughout an extended period of time over a fiscal year, I mean, it's crippling for families. I mean, it's really destructive for families.
Let me check in. You're watching The Conversation Live. Conversation Live focuses on social justice, restorative justice, inclusion, and equality. And my guest today is Alex Keledjian, and he is the secretary of a political action group here, Business Leaders for Better Government. It's a super PAC, and we're just unpacking his story. Alex, we're just about out of time. I'm going to give you 20 seconds, final thought. What do you want people to know?
That we are here for the right reasons. We are nonpartisan. We want what's best for the community. This is not a left wing or right wing thing. We want what's best for businesses, schools, keeping it with local control and trying to help all the constituents. We're here to help you. We are not here to hurt anything.
How can people get in contact with you? And we'll make sure we put that up in the comments.
We have a Facebook page that you can reach out to us. We have a website that should be live. You can look me up on Facebook. You can look up Cheryl. You can reach out to us personally or through those two other entities.
Cool, Alex, thank you so much again.
Perfect.
You're watching The Conversation Live. I'm your host, James Farr. Join us here every Wednesday, 3 p.m. live for more piercing and provocative Conversation Live. Till we have another opportunity to speak with you, as always, agape. Thank you. The Conversation Live is brought to you by